Thank you, Suresh. This next talk is a little bit different. We're framing it as a fireside chat. So we have John Spence, who leads up our North America data service line at ThoughtWorks, and Amy McNee from AWS. And it's really going to be a question and answer conversation that can explore the AWS's interest in data mesh. They've seen quite a bit of interest in adoption over the past several months, and follow up to hear about how their experience has been on this journey as well. So, John, Amy, welcome. Please take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Spence, and I'm the North America Director for Data and AI Service Line at ThoughtWorks. And with me today is Amy McNee. Amy is the head of the Worldwide Analytics Platform Strategy team at AWS, and she brings 30 years of experience in analytics and data management. Amy, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, John.
So we're going to talk about data mesh and your experiences at Amazon. Over the past almost year now, we've seen a lot of interest from AWS and a lot of enthusiasm for data mesh. Amy, can you tell us a little bit about the excitement in data mesh at Amazon?
Sure. Well, first, we've seen the demand from our customers, and we've seen companies have success using AWS, using a microservices approach at places like BMW and Engie. And another great example is JP Morgan Chase, who published a blog on how they approached building a data mesh with AWS. So there's a lot of excitement about data mesh in the market right now, and companies are looking for partners who know how to solve these big analytical data problems. So we also think AWS is uniquely suited to support these architectures that companies are going to need to build as part of an overall data mesh pattern. So the breadth of our platform can support the really diverse technical needs of what will be required, like, for instance, the scalability of S3, governance capabilities with Lake Formation and Glue, federation with Redshift Spectrum, data consumption with Amazon Athena, and even advanced governance capabilities with Amazon Macie to use AI/ML to detect that pesky PII data that can sneak in through unstructured data sources like voice and text. So AWS has been advocating microservices for years. We don't think that there is a one-size-fits-all approach to data. And we're going to see a lot of variability in how data mesh gets implemented, both technically and organizationally, over the next few years. So there's another reason, though, John. So there are a lot of parallels with data mesh and the modern data platform that Amazon.com has deployed. So Amazon needs to scale almost infinitely. So you might be surprised to hear that we were on a monolithic data warehouse until November of 2018. So we don't follow, the exact pattern of a mesh, but there are a lot of parallels. So we did call it a data marketplace, so go figure. But one of our main tenets is that we push responsibility out to the edges of the organization for governance, for quality, for data ownership. And we created a direct relationship between consumers of data and producers of data through a construct called a data contract. And a data contract really resembles the concept of a data product because it really is an enabler of findability and data understandability. So it includes everything you would need to know to use the data, including things like SLAs for update frequency, data quality, end of life, the intended business purpose. So when a consumer searches for data in the marketplace, they actually search these contracts to find what they need. A producer can't publish data without publishing a contract. Now, since the technical team wasn't focusing on, centralized governance and centralized data management, they could really shift their attention to automation and tooling that's used by the producers and consumers. And there's no way that Amazon could have successfully migrated over 1 million analytics jobs for over 80,000 users and 50 petabytes of data in 18 months if we didn't decentralize and use automation. So to answer your question, the topic is really important to our customers, and it's also important to us as a company.
Well, great. That's great, Amy. I really appreciate you giving that in-depth discussion about how you've been employing it at Amazon. And so if you look at some of your customers, can you talk about some of the successes that they're experiencing with data mesh?
Sure. For some customers, the concept of data products is the first problem that they're trying to solve. So finding and understanding the context of data is one of the core benefits of a data mesh. And it's where a lot of companies are trying to start. So this was, think about COVID, and it was really exacerbated because you couldn't just yell over the wall and say, hey, where do I find that? And hope, the person who had the answer was somewhere within earshot. So, we worked with one pharma company who told us that if they had a better ability to just find data, they could shave an entire year off of a 10-year research project. And that's huge. For another pharma company, they wanted to leverage work that they'd already done on these separate individual catalogs that they built in different business units. They essentially wanted to connect to the metadata across the catalogs so they could find information across the whole enterprise to unlock innovation. So the next problem that we are working with customers to solve is around data quality. So with the growing variety of data we see, it's really difficult to govern data centrally with a high level of quality. So within the context of a mesh, pushing that responsibility back to the producers who actually understand the business logic behind the data is going to ensure that, those important nuances don't get lost in translation. So that process in the past of handing data off from a producer to a central BI team was really fraught with misunderstanding. So a data mesh will smooth that out a bit. But I do think one of the most important concepts that a data mesh surfaces is this inherent ability for self-service design. So instead of trying to build a data platform that's one ring to rule them all, we need to start focusing on the intention for the data and the business use cases that we're solving that are going to actually drive value in organizations. So you have to know who the customer is and what the actual outcome you're trying to deliver. That's really one of the great things about that approach is it's naturally aligned to the Amazon working backwards methodology. And we've worked with customers to help them use data more effectively on use cases from vaccine research to border security, from predictive maintenance to sales reporting, and really everything in between. And we start with the experience that we're trying to create for a specific persona, and we work backwards to identify those data products and the technology that we need to support it. So this approach really accelerates innovation, and it makes sure that you're delivering what the business needs when they need it by using autonomous agile teams. So those are just a few examples of the kinds of problems and approaches that we're using to try to solve them with a data mesh.
Great. So, in talking about things like providing a self-service capability and some of the other enablers that you were discussing, how critical is it to have a solid foundation of a strong technical architecture and set of technologies? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, absolutely. Like customers need to build on a platform over the long term, and they don't want to architect themselves into a corner. A modern data platform is one that you can keep innovating without re-architecting. I talked about Amazon, right? We went live in November of 2018, and we have been innovating on that platform every day. So I would venture to guess that no one in the audience today wants to have to completely start over again in 5 years. So a data mesh isn't a destination, right? It's an ongoing journey that needs a solid foundation for continuous innovation. And we believe that using AWS services provide that because of the ability for these services to infinitely scale up and to scale down if necessary, which really helps companies manage and control their costs as their business evolves. So if you think back, a lot of data warehouses failed because they just couldn't support the needs of the business as it evolved to include use cases that required voice and images and video, other unstructured data. They were great in their first iteration, but as it changed, then they started to fail. Even just from sheer size, data warehouses struggled to scale to meet the needs of new relational workloads. In fact, we experienced that at Amazon.com. There was a time prior to our migration where we couldn't get machine learning jobs to run against our data warehouse if they had more than 100 million rows. The jobs would literally just stop processing. So our data warehouse was limiting our ability to be innovative. So another part of the foundation has to also address the constant evolution of technology, and we have to simplify that for technologists and for users. You know, John, I don't know what you, it seems like every day there's a new framework or a new coding language coming out. And that's really hard for people to keep up with. So another thing that we talk about is abstracting the complexities of the technology away from users with capabilities like AWS CloudFormation to support infrastructure as code, to consistently provision environments for new data products that are aligned with an organization's standards. And you know, you can't have a conversation about your foundation without talking about security. So security is job zero at Amazon, and it should be for anyone building data ecosystems. Companies definitely need a robust set of capabilities to ensure that they can implement the security governance and compliance requirements that are specific and necessary in their environment. So all these things that I just talked about are really important considerations when you're establishing foundational capabilities.
So before, you used a term that I really like. You said it's a journey. And so if this technical foundation is your first step on that journey, what are some other steps? What are some other critical must-haves for organizations to be successful with data mesh?
Yeah, and if there's one thing that everybody takes away from our talk today, it's that data mesh isn't just about technology. It is a complete mindset shift that includes considerations related to people and process, as well as technology change. So organization, governance, funding, and technology are all pillars on the stool that companies are going to need to think about when they're starting on a data mesh journey. And I really think that the impact of the change gets missed. So, you know, you can't apply 30-year-old methodologies for development to modern architectures and expect a lot of success. Many companies still take 9 to 12 months to put something into production for users to test and learn, and that's just too long. So companies need to start to embrace an agile approach to building out their data products, and IT and business cannot operate as separate entities. They have to work together in collaboration to ideate, build, test, and then iterate. So there really is a need for operational and organizational alignment to support a data mesh. Most data organizations, they really haven't managed data the way you would manage a data product. So they don't have the structures or skills in place already to do it. That's a big challenge. So one company we spoke with said they had 1,300 data products at any one given time. So first they struggled to go from that experiment stage to production. And then once a product was in production, they didn't really have anyone watching over it to determine when it wasn't actually useful anymore. So to address that, they had to add some specific roles for data product managers to manage the overall life cycle. Amazon, as an example, we organize into teams. They're small, autonomous, 2 pizza teams. And the theory is that teams should be no larger than what you can feed with 2 pizzas. So that's where the name came from. But these teams are organized around the delivery of specific, measurable deliverables and outcomes. So for most companies, decentralization, it's going to require more upskilling of producer and consumer teams to enable them to take on more accountability for their data. And finally, if you're moving to a decentralized model, the way that projects are funded also has to be aligned. And I think this is probably the number one thing that I see companies miss. You can't have centralized funding through IT and expect a decentralized model to work. Alternatively, you can't only have funding in the business without some kind of central pool to support platform innovations, security, automation, and tooling. It's really important to consider a hybrid funding model when you're thinking about a data mesh. So these organizational and alignment and funding changes need to happen to be successful with the data mesh.
So that's a lot of things. There's a lot of stuff you have to get right to be successful. And, in talking to some of our clients and prospects, we find that those key ingredients may not be in place, or they may not be ready to take that big next step. It seems that you've had similar experiences. And so what are your thoughts on this? What do you say to those customers?
Really, if companies aren't willing to address all of these considerations, then data mesh might not be the right strategy. I think, first, data mesh provides great imagery, and that imagery has deeply resonated in the industry for how we want data to work in our organizations. But from a pure architectural pattern, not all companies need to move to this kind of model, nor are a lot of companies actually ready to make those other non-technical changes that are going to be necessary. So if a company has low complexity related to the domains they would need to support, a centralized model might work just fine, especially if they don't want to make the organizational changes to support the pattern.
Well, before you talked about this also being a journey, and again, I really do love that metaphor for the effort and the process that you're going to go through. We're talking about some of the challenges, but can you talk also about some of the successes, some of the key milestones you've seen with customers who've taken this journey and seen success with it?
Yeah, I think by the way, if a company didn't look at it as a journey and they looked at data mesh as a big bang approach, I would be really worried. Yeah. So I do think you have to look at it as a journey. But there are three key things that I think are important. You talk about milestones or things that companies need to think about when they're embarking on the journey. And so those three things are experimentation, optimization, and standardization. So first, at AWS, we really believe in experimentation. So start with one use case within limited domains. Build the pattern for your foundational architecture. You don't need to answer every question at once. Iterate, test, learn. And every time you build a new data product, build those learnings into your architecture. After a few iterations, you're going to start to create repeatable processes that can be scaled. You're also going to identify organizational and skill gaps that are going to be important to address for long-term success. So we're working with a bank right now who's early in their data mesh journey, where the first use case is on fraud investigation. So their plan is to deploy the MVP across the producer and consumer community to test, learn, and then repeat. So we're still thinking big, but we're going to start small to learn and then put ourselves in a position to scale fast with that customer. Next, from an optimization standpoint, I think some people have interpreted mesh as just federated, virtualized data, and that's not practical for every workload. So you have to think about performance and cost implications associated with a federated set of cross-domain data. So for some workloads, it's still going to make sense to pre-join it. This is really important for workloads like machine learning. So you don't want to pay for a model to just sit there running, waiting for data movement across multiple domains. Unfortunately, we're still bound by the laws of physics. So, and the other thing is going to be around performance. So virtualized federated data structures are really fantastic for saving space and reducing the amount of data replication and data movement across the platform. But data products that are used by end users in your company, or more importantly, your customers, might still require some aggregated, persisted, optimized structures. I just think of these as another type of data product to support a specific experience that can be shared and discovered and reused. So cost and performance are still going to be important factors in determining what kind of data products can be federated and which ones actually need some kind of data preparation step. So I'll give you an example. Creating real-time offers using customer segmentation based on some kind of customer analytical record or CAR. That's going to require data from across diverse domains like marketing, finance, and sales. So to do that in real time, you're likely going to have to aggregate data to meet the performance requirements of a real-time interaction. But then, that aggregated structure just becomes a new data product. Mm-hmm. Last thing that I'll mention here, I know this is a little bit long, is to talk about standardization. I think it's going to take too long for a company to try and standardize metadata across the entire organization as a precursor to data mesh. We've seen a lot of companies start their data mesh journey as a data governance project, and they've really been distracted from delivering outcomes and value to end user. So you should definitely have a vision of what great looks like around standardization, but we've seen lots of examples where just creating a data catalog can take years, and that isn't necessarily standardizing the metadata within each source. You don't want to wait years to start getting value from a data mesh approach. So standardize in the context of building your data products, that'll provide a way to kind of iterate quicker and learn. So start with those core high priority domains first, and then establish a pattern that can be followed by other data products. So, those are kind of three key things that I think we've seen customers learn, and three key things that are important to consider.
Well, this has been great. There's some really practical and deep experience that you've shared with us today, and greatly appreciate it. Are there any last thoughts before we finish up?
Yeah, look, start small, do some experiments, start to build up a community around your data products, pay attention to culture change, and make sure that you understand the implications to how you're going to need to organize and manage data products over time. Those non-technical aspects of implementing a data mesh, those are the ones that are going to trip you up. So get in front of them. The last thing is that while you're on this journey, don't forget about that last mile. Don't forget that a company cannot be data-driven if you only solve the needs of technology stakeholders. You have to consider how the average end user is going to consume data products and be able to use data during the normal course of business. So if you focus on both technology and business stakeholders, you're really going to accelerate your ability to become data-driven.
Well, that's great. Amy, thank you so much. We appreciate your time today.
Thanks so much, John.